I've dwelt a lot here on the past about how things were at a time when, as one of the expressions would put it, discovering the Jewish past was like exploring Atlantis, recognizing, remembering, and resurrecting a continent that had vanished virtually overnight. But I think it's worth remembering this period when we talk about changing landscapes, particularly from the viewpoint of today, when so much is going on in so many different ways. It can be difficult to remember and to recognize how new things felt back then, how, dare I say, revolutionary it was. After all, for someone of student age today, 1990 can seem like ancient history. The changes have been dramatic regarding infrastructure, information sources, agencies of display, ownership, communications, and other practicalities. One experience that drove this home to me came on a trip to Ukraine already back in 2008. I was with two colleagues, Sergei Kravtsov and Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimlet. We were in the old Jewish cemetery in Bolechiv, south of Lviv in Ukraine, trying without success to find the grave of Ber of Bolchov, an 18th century wine merchant who was famous for having written his memoirs. Frustrated, Sergei finally whipped out his rather basic cell phone and called a colleague in Israel to get precise directions. I can't tell you what an impression this made on me. Today, we all have smartphones and we think nothing of searching the web or social media or calling free on WhatsApp, no matter where we are. And the internet is full of websites and videos and travel apps and virtual tours to help you find your way. Some Jewish cemeteries and other Jewish heritage sites now even have QR codes attached so you can access specific information on the spot. But all that was impossible when Sergei made his call. Remember, the first iPhone had only come out a year earlier. The image of him phoning to a different continent from an abandoned 17th century Jewish cemetery to find directions to the grave of someone who died in 1805 remains, in my mind at least, a turning point, a wonderful example of a complex of changed conditions. And in Bolechov, the changes continued. The entire cemetery was digitally documented a decade ago, and photos and epitaphs of each headstone are easily found online. Technological changes are a big part of the changing Jewish heritage landscape. But importantly, there have also been changes in deep-seated attitudes towards Jewish heritage, as well as increasing, if uneven, professionalism and strategic thinking when it comes to preservation, display, and reuse. On the Jewish Heritage Europe website and our various social media, I try to keep track of developments, but there's always too much. I sometimes feel overwhelmed. The challenges, however, remain enormous. Despite remarkable successes in recent decades, many Jewish heritage sites remain in perilous condition, and many key questions remain, particularly as the Holocaust recedes into history, and unfortunately, as we've seen in recent months, as anti-Semitism evolves and reemerges. Thanks. I'll stop there and we can start our conversation.
Thank you, Ruth. Again, I think it's absolutely amazing that you can offer us this overview not only through the space but also through the time, as you are coming back to the same places often for some time. I mean, that's 35 years since your first visit. It was a different space. So yes, I mean, perhaps there are questions from the audience, but before that, I'm kind of thinking about the challenges and certain tensions that may or may not be visible with this revival of Jewish culture that we are witnessing, at least in some of those places. Are there what are the challenges in preserving Jewish heritage in terms of navigating between the needs of the Jewish communities that exist and or the Jews that are living outside of the country and for whom this is part of their heritage, distance heritage, and finally non-Jews that lives in those places.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenge, I mean, the challenge is there's many sites. Um, there was a survey done, documentation done, sort of inventory done, carried out by the Center for Jewish Art in Jerusalem. They were commissioned by the Foundation for Jewish Heritage, based in London, to carry out this inventory of synagogues. And there are something like 3,400 historic synagogues um, standing in one form or another in in Europe today, all over Europe. But only a very small minority are used as synagogues, and hundreds are in terrible condition. Some are in a condition which is like it would be impossible to bring them back to being synagogues or even restore them, and they may have been, um, rebuilt in a way that it would be impossible to restore, turned into some other function, for example. And there are hundreds that are, still used as other things like sports halls or shops or cinemas, swimming pool, whatever. Um, but there are a number of these which can be uh, sort of, as I say, placed in adaptive reuse. But it takes money, and it takes money, and it takes goodwill. And the goodwill can exist, but if there isn't money to carry it out, a good example of this is the synagogue in Slonim in Belarus. I'm not quite sure what the latest is. I think it has been bought by a Russian oligarch, but I'm not quite sure about this. But it's like the most important empty synagogue in Belarus. It's in fairly decent condition, but it's been abandoned. And it was on the World Monuments list of endangered Jewish sites already, I think 30 years ago. But nothing has happened, even with all the goodwill in the world. Um, a few years ago, a Belarusian writer bought it, thinking that she would be able to restore it and make a cultural summit. She bought it at auction for a small amount of money. But the conditions under which the state has has made the agreement, the conditions that are placed on any restoration of the building were so onerous that she wasn't able to raise the money. She wasn't able to get experts. She wasn't able to carry it out. Also, the Foundation for Jewish Heritage ran into the same thing. So all the goodwill in the world made her give up the building. It was sold another couple times at auction, and now apparently some wealthy oligarch has bought it, but I don't know what the latest is. So the goodwill can be there, but you have to have money. You have to, when you restore a building, you have to know what it's going to be used for. And when you restore a building or a cemetery, you have to do something to make sure it's going to be maintained. It has to be sustainable. If I can just, before your next question, I ran into this in Italy, at a Jewish cemetery in Italy that had been cleaned up. I mean, it's a town where almost no Jews live, and the cemetery had been beautifully cleaned up by the Rotary Club 20 years ago, and then by the town 7 or 8 years ago, and then nothing was done. And it's a complete jungle again. And if you don't have maintenance, if you don't sort of make sure that somebody will take care of it, whether it's school children, where it's volunteers, where it's the city, then it'll just go back to its old state. So these sort of these are some of the challenges. These are like practical challenges. Then there are many other challenges, like who's going to do it. There's still attitudes that don't really care for these places. What can they be used for? All of these things. There's a complex, but I think the basic money, what will it be used for? Goodwill, and sustainability are major concerns when you deal with these things.
And you mentioned about the usage. Um, in Poland, perhaps one of those the most drastic way the synagogue was maybe not used but abused is turning it to the saloon, to the Wild West style restaurant, and you've been there. Are there any
Yeah.
other examples of extreme um, misuse of the sites, or on the other hand, can you share with us some positive examples of a positive
Yeah.
process that ended up with something beautiful being created in an unusual, unexpected locations?
Yeah, I mean, I think there if you have sensitivity, uh the saloon that it was actually I didn't actually go into the saloon. I've been in it's a complex. It's in Chelm. And what's good about this is there's a plaque on the outside of the building which says that it was a synagogue. It tells the story. It could be better, but at least says what it was. And I think signage is very important. Um, the many synagogues have been turned into other things. I think in Poland, maybe the most egregious was the synagogue in Poznań, which was turned by the Nazis into a swimming pool. There's a synagogue in Austria in Hohenems that the post-Holocaust government in 1994-95 turned the synagogue, which survived the war, into a fire station. And the most cynical transformation you can think of, given the fact that so many synagogues had been torched and burned. But what happened in Hohenems is that, you know, over the years, there was interest grew. A Jewish museum was founded in Hohenems, and the fire station was moved out, and the building was restored, and now is a cultural space. So there can be some reversals of this. But it doesn't have anything inside to show that it was a synagogue. But there's signage and there's an exhibition and all. Um, but you can transform a synagogue into something else if you retain a sensitivity in doing it. And there's there are two synagogues in the town of Trnava. I showed you in one of those slides this totally devastated interior of the status quo, which is sort of a moderate. It's not reform. It's Orthodox, but didn't belong to the traditional Orthodox. All of this, the status quo synagogue was a shell, a totally ruined shell, and that was restored to be an art gallery. And that restoration, just like the restoration in Shamorin, was restored. The building was restored in such a way that showed evidence of the destruction that it went through. So I really liked the way this was done. Um, it had a new function as an art gallery, but you could still see that it had gone through this trauma. It wasn't, pristine. It wasn't brought back to look like nothing had happened. You could see there's several synagogues that have been restored like this. And you and I have discussed the possibility of a synagogue in Czarny Dunajec in Poland to be restored in such a way that shows the trauma. Now, across the street from that synagogue, there's an Orthodox synagogue, and that was restored. First, it was restored. That was restored about in 2010, 2011. That was restored to be another art gallery across the street. Um, the beautiful paintings, because were restored. It had not been a very devastated shell like the other synagogue, but the wall paintings and the ark were all restored in a beautiful way. But it was used as a contemporary art gallery, also photographic gallery, really. But that gallery went bankrupt, and this synagogue then became a cafe. It's called the Synagogue Cafe. And I think it's an example of how a synagogue can go through transformations, and the building is now, okay, it's a cafe, but the history of the building is there. You can learn about the building. There are, I think there's like information where you can see how the transformation came place. And it's, I think it's an okay place. It's not, it's like this, it hasn't been desecrated in a way. It hasn't been deliberately desecrated. It's reused. It's adaptive reuse. And so there are a couple examples like this. I mean, there are many synagogues that have been restored, you know, to look even better than they looked before the Holocaust. There's one in a small town, Budinje, north of Prague, which when I saw it, you couldn't even tell in 1990. This is a town where they didn't even know what a synagogue meant, what the word meant. It was just some sort of warehouse, and it's been restored to pristine condition, which is probably better than it was, in 1939. And it's used now as a cultural space. It's beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful building in the town. So there are lots of initiatives to do many things with the buildings and and even ruins. Preserved ruins can be important. The synagogues in Jalshica in Poland and Nowy Korczyn in Poland were both abject ruins, but they've been conserved as ruins. So they serve as memorials as well as historic sites. So that also is a way that you can deal with the building.
Yes, I fully agree that perhaps the biggest challenge in context of Eastern Europe, where the Jewish communities exist in most places only in major cities, um, is to restore those or approach those places uh, in a way that will allow to see glimpses of the glory of the building, but most of all of the community that created that building, whether a couple of 100 years ago or 100 years ago, but also precisely to not to overshadow the fact that in most cases this community is gone, not to plaster, not to cover up the trauma, as you say, of the history, and finding the balance between those two stories um, is perhaps the biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges. And there is a question from one of our participants, which is about UNESCO in terms of what is the attitude of UNESCO on proclaiming these buildings or some of these buildings as World Heritage Sites.
Um, Let me just dial to UNESCO. UNESCO recognizes several, until a few years ago, UNESCO had not listed almost any Jewish heritage site on its roster of World Heritage, and the roster of World Heritage. But there have been some moves now. I think the most important one, I guess, the most specific one, let's say, spectacular one, is UNESCO has recognized what are known as the Schum cities along the Rhine in Germany, the medieval Jewish heritage in the towns of Worms, Speyer, and Mainz are called the Schum cities. And these have been recognized by UNESCO as being on the list, their roster of World Heritage. That's a few years ago. I think in Erfurt, the medieval Jewish heritage in Erfurt in Germany has also been recognized by UNESCO as being on World Heritage list. And then there are a few places, for example, Bardejov in Slovakia, where the entire center of the town, it's a beautiful town with a very, very beautiful, well-preserved old town, of which the Jewish section, they call it the Jewish suburbium, just sort of outside of the main old square. This has also been all placed on the World Heritage list. So the Jewish component is part of the center of the city. And this also, I believe, is in the town of Třebíč in Czech Republic, where the Jewish ghetto, the old ghetto, not World War II ghetto, but the historic ghetto area, which has two synagogues, a beautiful Jewish cemetery, a lot of old buildings. That's in the old town, and that is now also part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site as part of this old town. And only recently, UNESCO sort of gave its patronage to the European Days of Jewish Culture, and this is also an important step. And when the AEPJ had its 20th anniversary celebrations a few weeks ago, uh, UNESCO also played a role in that because it's now recognizing more and more. The AEPJ has become sort of active in, these official uh, relationships with organizations and things.
Hmm. Thank you. Um, I have bazillion questions, as my children would say, but there are also questions from the audience. One of them is about the synagogue with the laundry machines. Is what happened with that particular place?
Oh, that picture was from 1990, and it was restituted back to the Jewish community in Prague, and they restored it, but not restored it as a synagogue. I think it's used as office space now. I'm not exactly sure, but it's owned by the Jewish community and is managed by the Jewish community. So it's no longer a laundry. It's um, I think it's some sort of office or public space, something like that. It's not a cultural space, as far as I know. Although some other synagogues in Prague have been now restored as cultural spaces that were not before, which were just used as other things. And
Thank you.
that's it's a very outer suburb of Prague, Užině. So
Yeah, and then I think that is taking us to yet another difficult reality of Eastern Europe, of the Jewish communities that are again small and often at some point in 1990s became the owners of hundreds, dozens of hundreds of places, not
yeah.
having financial means to upkeep them, to restore them. Which then resulted with some very difficult decisions that were made. That was certainly a case in Poland, but I guess that this is also the reality of Czech Republic.
Well, the Czech Republic had a strategy from the early 90s. They formed I don't know if I would call it a company, but an outfit to manage their property. And the Czech Jewish community in Poland, there were thousands of properties were claimed for restitution. The Czechs were more selective, and they made a list of, I think it was 2001 properties, and not 2000, I'm sorry, 201 properties to get restituted. And they got the places back, and they worked with local communities on the local municipalities on the restorations of some others. And they had a very definite strategy of how to go about their work. And in Czech Republic, there have been, I would say it was sort of like the model of how restoration, reclamation, restitution could be carried out, because they had a plan and a strategic model and a way of thinking about these things. And they were able, for example, there were a lot of individual restoration projects. And then about, around 2010 or something like that, they were able to get a big grant from the EU to restore synagogues and in 5 towns all over the country. And in 5 of these towns, there was another Jewish building that was restored. And so these were called the 10 Stars. And this was launched or sort of inaugurated after the completion of the restorations in 2014. And there are these 10 synagogues with 5 other buildings. And in each of the 10 places, there's a monothematic exhibition. So it's as if it's a Jewish museum spread all over the country. And you can get like a, passport where if you go to each one, you get it stamped. And you can, if you see all 10, it's like you're going to a one museum with 10 sections all over the country. And since Czech Republic is quite small, it's not all that difficult to see several of these. And that was a wonderful project. And but the grant from the EU was for education. It was not for tourism. So for 5 years, they were not allowed to do anything commercial in these buildings. So no cafes, no gift shops, nothing like this. So it also had an impact on like how these places were used, who used them, who came, and all of this. But it still is a wonderful network of places of these buildings. And anyway, that was I saw. I mean, this summer I ran that picture of my brother and me in the Jewish cemetery in Radauts. We did this road trip, Jewish heritage road trip around Romania, and we saw how some of these challenges, you can feel them, you can see them, you can feel them because they're little Jewish communities all over Romania. And they own, many, probably most of the synagogues in Romania, either during the war or under Ceausescu, were destroyed. In Iași, I think 100 were destroyed, 2 were left. But we went to so many places where there are these little Jewish communities and potentially gorgeous big synagogues, all of which need, or almost all of which I would say, need extensive restoration work. And there's no money. In one town, in Oradea, yeah, the money came from Jewish community, but also there was an EU cross-border project with Hungary to restore one of the synagogues. So you have in Oradea 2 spectacularly restored synagogues, one of which is used for cultural purposes, one of which is still used by the community. But another synagogue in the town is now used as a Jewish museum. So there's really been some extraordinary success there. But if you go to, I mean, Radauts, where my family's from, they claimed that they had done restoration, but we saw, no evidence of it in the synagogue. And in Siret, another place where that has the most important Jewish cemeteries in Romania and a beautiful synagogue, there was a case there where the ark, which was 200 years old, was stolen and taken to Israel. And now there's like this sort of crummy replica, which is not, not labeled as a replica. People go there and they think it's the real thing, but the real ark was stolen. And I don't know, it's just, almost each case is different. Each case is its own. But when you see successes, they make you feel great. Alba Iulia is another town in Romania where there's been tremendous success in the Jewish heritage, also because of the attitude of the municipality. And when you see these places where people are struggling, you don't know what to do. Where's the money going to come from? That's money, you know, I hate to put it that way, but you can't rebuild without financing, even
Yes,
if
and I
there's
think it's. Please go ahead. Sorry.
no, it's okay.
No, I mean, just also what we've seen is that the money for rebuilding a place is only a start, because then, as you mentioned, it's also the running costs, which can be significant in terms of some of those buildings. So it's not only
Yes.
the money, whether from European Union or municipality, that will allow to restore the building to some sort of of usability, but then the idea for how to use that space in the way that it will allow to in a sensitive way, present the story, but also, as you say, uh, be self sustainable. Um, then, I mean, there will be more questions, but let me just ask one of our guests and then one of mine. There is a
Okay.
specific question about Joniskis in Lithuania, the red and white synagogues. Can you
Oh, yeah.
say anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, my knowledge of them is up to a point. I visited them, I guess, 2006. And after I visited them, one of them collapsed. The Red Synagogue collapsed. But then as far as I know, both of them have been rebuilt and are used for cultural use. Um, I haven't been there since, but I've seen the photographs. So as far as I know, both the red and the white have been restored and are used as cultural spaces. But I don't know the current specifics of what programs they have or what. But yeah,
Thank
it
you.
had dramatic pictures of this collapsed synagogue, one wall of it just. But no, that's been rebuilt.
So the last question, perhaps, for this program is about the future. I mean, what's the future of the Jewish heritage in Europe, having in mind what is happening in that sense that on the one hand we see that in some places the Jewish life is slowly coming back. Poland may be one of those examples where at least in the major cities we see uh, slowly growing, vibrant-ish Jewish communities. Um, in other places across the same country, we will never see a Jewish communities coming back. And I think there were certain ways in 1990s, perhaps the discovery and of this Atlantis and excitement. But at the same time, in other parts, like in Ukraine, it was also the time of creation of the independent state, which meant erasure of any trace of the past that would not be the past of that country. And then also in Ukraine, we've seen another wave of rediscovering of this past, of finding the pride from the fact that we are living in a world that once was multicultural and multi-ethnic. So if you are to guess, uh, what is what is ahead? What is around the corner for us?
Well, I mean, if I were to guess, I would say that some of these buildings are going to fall down and some of them are going to be saved. That's all I can say. And with the cemeteries, they're now, I think the cemeteries, there's something like what, 10,000 Jewish cemeteries in Europe. I mean, really thousands. Many of them completely abandoned. But there are a lot of initiatives. And in Poland now has this, the government has stepped in and um, there's a move to mark the cemeteries. So I think signage is really important. Um, Even if a building is turned into something else, some of these synagogues are still the biggest buildings in the town. If it's turned into something else, even if it's left as a preserved ruin, signage is important to say what it was. Just like just like with this, I mentioned this Jewish cemetery in Italy. There's no sign, there's a plaque apparently was put in 20 years ago when the Rotary Club restored the center, but you can't get into to see it. So it needs signage outside to say, historic Jewish cemetery. Whether it's overgrown or not, it at least puts them on the map. So there is a move to mark places. There are initiatives, on Jewish Heritage Europe. We run these roundups of dozens and dozens of volunteer initiatives to clean up Jewish cemeteries and to mark them and to restore them or whatever. There's a lot being done with technology because there's an awareness that these buildings or these cemeteries are not necessarily going to stand the test of time. So there's a move to digitally document them. So at least they will have these. And this is another way to save things. I mean, the technology, as I mentioned in my little presentation, technology, it was revolutionary to go out and look at these places and find them physically. But it's also been revolutionary now to use digital technology to reconstruct them, to preserve them, to document them. And there are a lot of places that are a lot of projects to digitally document both buildings and cemeteries and individual gravestones. So this, I think, the digital capacity and the digital quotient are going to be play important roles going forward. I was going to, if I were to, I don't know if there's time, but I had this little present. I can tell you what I don't have to show the pictures, but I can just show you, some of the arc of uh, the way attitudes have changed and the way preservation has changed.
Please do.
Um,
Yes, let's.
I mean, I think it will take 5 or 6 minutes. It's
Of
not that
course, please
long.
do.
Let me share this because I think it's something, it shows what can be done. More can be done, but it shows some things that can be done based on interest and not just volunteerism, but outside interest, EU, municipalities, Jewish input. And I'll just share the screen again.
Yes, and I think it also on top of
Wait.
money and all the other things, it also requires trust in that sense that we need to
Yes.
trust that it will not necessarily be by Jewish hands
Yes,
that
definitely.
those processes will take place.
And and this in this little presentation you'll see um, it regards a figure and the work of the architect Liepot Baumhorn. He was the most prolific synagogue architect in Central Europe before World War II. He designed or remodeled nearly 25 synagogues between 1888 and his death in 1932. I first encountered him in September 1989 at a big ceremony rededicating Baumhorn's masterpiece, the new synagogue in Szeged, Hungary, following a little bit of restoration work. And these are pictures from that. After Szeged, I visited Baumhorn's last major synagogue, which was in Junjus. It reminded me of the Taj Mahal, that it was painted this dull pea green, and it was being turned into a department store, a cut-rate department store. And that's Junjus in 1990. And this is Szeged, the exterior of Szeged, the masterpiece of Baumhorn. These two synagogues led me to become utterly fascinated with Baumhorn and his work. I tried to find out as much as I could about him, but there wasn't much. There was almost nothing. Over many months in the early 1990s, I tried to visit as many of his surviving synagogues as I could in Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, and what was then Yugoslavia. They included two that were used as sports halls. I showed one earlier. Some that were still synagogues, and some that stood very neglected. Then, in January 1993, a friend of mine and I looked for his grave in the vast Kozma Utca Jewish Cemetery in Budapest. After some mistaken directions by the cemetery custodian, we ended up at what looked like a very bushy tree. And that's what we found, that picture. And there's Baumhorn on the side. In what remains one of the most emotional experiences of my career, my friend and I used our fingers and our Swiss Army knives to rip away the vegetation and reveal the tombstone. It bore a list of 23 synagogues that Baumhorn designed or remodeled, as well as a carving of the great dome of the Szeged Synagogue and a poetic epitaph. That's what we cleared off. They were clearing it, and that's how it looked. You could still see the the traces of the ivy that was on it. My essay detailing my search for Baumhorn, published in my 1994 book, Upon the Doorposts of Thy House, was, I think, the first lengthy treatment of him and his work to appear in English. 5 years later, part of my essay was used as the introduction for the catalog of the first ever exhibition on Baumhorn that was mounted in Budapest in 1999. In an article I wrote about that exhibition, I commented on the changes in the decades since I had first encountered Baumhorn and his work. Their fate, I wrote, quote, can be seen as a metaphor for the modern Jewish experience in Hungary. Optimism, splendor, destruction, oblivion, and, since the fall of communism, rediscovery and revival. This assessment could extend to Jewish heritage as a whole in East Central Europe. Indeed, in the many, many years since I wrote that, what has gone on regarding Baumhorn has exemplified Jewish heritage in general. It has been a gradual and ongoing process of recognition, study, appreciation, restoration, and promotion, which is not yet complete and not completely successful, far from it. But at least Baumhorn and his work are no longer forgotten footnotes. They are now the subject of academic study as well as cultural and touristic promotion. He was the topic of a recent PhD dissertation, for example, and books, articles, and exhibitions have focused on his work. In 2006, I was delighted to find an actual monument to Baumhorn himself standing outside his synagogue outside the synagogue he designed in Szolnok, Hungary, which is now used as a cultural venue. And in this little insert, I visited it again last summer, and it's still there, I was very happy to say. Some of the restorations of his synagogues have been literally transformative. His rundown synagogue on Pava Street in Budapest became part of the city's Holocaust Memorial Museum in 2004. And his grand synagogue in Luchanec, Slovakia, which was long a tragic ruin, was beautifully restored and reopened as a cultural center in 2016. There's before and after. His synagogue in Murska Sobota, Slovenia, meanwhile, which was torn down in the 1950s, has also been reconstructed in 3D digital form. It's one of those many projects like that I mentioned. To be sure, 2 of his synagogues remained used as sports halls, and despite announced restoration plans, the synagogue in Junjas stands empty and deteriorating in worse condition than when I saw it in 1989. The wonderful Fabric Synagogue in Timișoara, Romania also remains derelict, but by now it's on the World Monuments Fund watch list of global heritage at risk, and restoration work is due to start if it hasn't started already. In the past few years, Baumhorn and his work were a focus of the EU-funded Rediscover project, aimed at promoting Jewish heritage tourism in 9 small cities in 8 countries. His work was the focus of several exhibitions and publications. And here's just a sample of them. There's a smartphone app about the new synagogue in Szeged. There were several of these outdoor exhibitions. There's a beautiful book about the stained glass windows in Szeged. And I saw this exhibition, the one at the top right, an exhibition about Baumhorn. I saw it in Stockholm. So there's a lot of stuff went on. Then if we can circle back to his gravestone, this too has been restored. I have to say that this is a place where I make, I don't know, frequent, but regular pilgrimages to this gravestone. It's now a monument to a recognized noted personality and not the forgotten tombstone of a forgotten man. And I think that this arc of rediscovery of Baumhorn, it's by no means complete because a couple of his synagogues are still, used as sports halls, and there's other things that you could say, but it's, it's sort of parallels or exemplifies what has been done with Jewish heritage in general. And it's taken somebody who was totally forgotten and totally obscure and just sort of brought him back. And in many ways, that's what's been going on, I think, with Jewish heritage in Europe. I mean, it was something that was so utterly forgotten. Now it's not forgotten anymore. Even in countries where the Jewish heritage is in poor condition and where it may be impossible to do a whole lot more, um, there are still some things happening. And there are still places that people recognize. I mean, it's a different world, and there are still now these digital worlds that we can also explore and create and visit. So I think, I think that in a way is about all I can say, because I don't, I can't predict the future, but some things will be good and some things will not. But there's a lot of documentation and study going on, and this digital piece is important now, because that's how places that will not survive physically will, in a way, survive.
Thank you, Ruth. And I think for all of us, it's hard to follow up and have a sense of the scope of the activity and the number of projects that are happening across all of Europe, all of the Jewish heritage Europe. And I think if one wants to keep track of those developments, Jewish Heritage Europe portal and Jewish Heritage in Europe would be the best port of call.
Yeah.
So please Google it out, jewishheritageeurope.eu, the website that is offering both updates and information about recent events, as well as a longer read, have your say, essays that are being provided by various people from all over the world related to Jewish heritage in Europe. So definitely, please visit and follow Jewish Heritage Europe.eu to get up to speed with what's happening in Europe. Our guide to that complicated landscape was Ruth Ellen Gruber. Ruth, thank you so much once again for spending this
Thank
evening
you.
with us. I very,
No,
very
thank
much
you.
hope. No, it's a pleasure seeing you. I miss not seeing you in Krakow, but I very much
I
hope
miss you
that.
too.
Thank you. I very much hope that we will get to see you and introduce you live in live space to our Cape Town audience
Me too. Me too.
in the near future. Thank you so
Me
much,
too.
Ruth. Stay
You,
well,
Kuba.
stay
Thanks,
safe.
thanks to everybody who was here. I couldn't see any of you, and it's very weird. I mean, everybody says it when you do these Zooms. Usually, when you give a talk in person, you're talking to people, but I guess you were there. I mean, I can't
Yes,
see
and
you. It's
and
it feels, I feel the lack. So
I know, I know. So again, let's treat it as a introduction to Ruth Ellen Gruber, and the real treat will be when we will be able to invite you to South Africa.
wonderful. That would be
Thank you so
wonderful.
much. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Thank
Take
you
care.
everybody for joining us.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.